Welcome, and so glad you are joining us. We'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So I want to tell you that this morning as I was preparing for class, I really felt uplifted by both the text itself and the Rashis of this little piece that we're doing here. And it's interesting because, of course, people basically associate, those who know this, associate Ki Tavo with the terrible curses that happen in the sixth Aliyah, that are mentioned in the sixth Aliyah. And yet, this Parsha also has some of the most beautiful and inspiring words that I think really, in some ways, sort of nail it as to the nature of our relationship with Hashem. So we're going to go in here to the screen share. So we are, remember, this is in the midst of this declaration that this person is making about his, the Bikurim. I believe we're still talking about that, right? Lo achalti be'oni mimenu, although it could have to do with the bi'ur and the removal of the tithes, because that's certainly what we were talking about, and that he makes this declaration when he does the bi'ur. So forgive my lapse in memory for a moment, but that, I believe, is what it's saying, and that one has to make this declaration as one makes sure all these tithes and sacred gifts and things like that are being removed from the house at the end of the third year, or in the end of the sixth year. So, lo achalti ba'oni mimenu, I did not eat, consume from it while in mourning. So when you experience the death of someone who's a very close relative, you actually enter a halachic state that is called aninut, or aninus, if you were going to speak Ashkenazit. And in that particular case, at least as I learned the halachot, that basically you are exempt from positive mitzvot until finally you have been able to take care of your close relative in burying them and making sure that they're buried. But between the death and the actual burial, one is in the state of aninut. You don't count for a minyan because you're not obligated to go to a minyan. That's a positive commandment. So just as an example. So we're saying we did not eat of this, consume of these particular things when I was in mourning. Velo, and Rashi will explain that. Okay. Velo bi'arti mimenu betame, and I did not remove from it while I was impure, or in impurity. Velo natati mimenu lamet, I did not give from it to the dead. Shamati bekol Hashem Elokai, I hearkened to the voice of the Lord my God. Asiti kechol asher tzivitani, I have performed, I have done everything that you have commanded me. Now, this verse for sure begs explanation. It's a very difficult verse to understand simply on its own. So Rashi is tremendously helpful here, and of course he's pulling from the tradition. All this material is stuff that is there within the tradition in explaining these particular verses, all this stuff. So, lo achalti ba'oni mimenu. So he says, I didn't eat from these tithes, these sacred foods, while I was in mourning, right? That's how we translated it. And Rashi simply says here, mikan she'asru la'onein. He's saying, taking that Hebrew, he's filling out what I explained already. These sacred gifts are forbidden to one who is in a state of mourning. Now, that may beg a question as to why. Why are these things sacred? I mean, you're in mourning, you're hurting, you're grieving. And the answer is that obviously there are other things that you are certainly allowed and perhaps even encouraged. I mean, you have, after the funeral, you have the havra'ah, which is the mourner's meal that you're supposed to eat after a funeral, and that's a mitzvah. And havra'ah has to do with bari, health, that at this point you're to be able to start to heal once again. And it's possible that there's several reasons this may be happening. One may be that psychologically it is allowing you to grieve. And when you eat of these sacred donations and you're in a state of grief, your mind really isn't settled. You're probably going to be thinking more about the fact that you've just lost this person that you loved, that you were very close to. And when you eat these particular sacred donations, that is a sacred act. It isn't purely for your own pleasure. And also you'll see that there are places, if you were to read the entire Parsha, you'll see towards the end of that section on curses, where it says these things are happening to you because you did not serve the Lord with joy. So associating happiness and joy along with our service, to be joyful in that service, is a mitzvah. And it's a very great thing. That's what this is telling us. So I'll continue at this point. Velo bi'arti mimenu b'tameh. I did not remove of it while in a state of purity. I'll just say not but while in a state of impurity. Bein she'ani tameh. So Rashi clarifies this, whether I was in a state of impurity, v'hu tahor, and these particular sacred gifts were pure, they were in a state of purity. Bein she'ani tahor, or I was in a state of purity, v'hu tameh, and it is in a state of impurity. So either way, because this is a sacred donation, issues of impurity raise their heads, and part of the consciousness, the level of consciousness in bringing a sacred donation is to be in a state of purity, and to avoid that impurity. By the way, the impurity, of course, is deeply associated with mortality and death. So these particular acts are life-giving, life-enhancing, and quite possibly are associated with immortality. So going on to say, Vehechan huz har alkein. But where is this prohibition? I'm saying I didn't do it, but where was I told not to do it? Vehechan huz har alkach. Where was he told that he's not allowed to do it? And he says, La'el Yud Bet, so above Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 17. So I'm going to take a moment and see if I can find verse 17. And this is, of course, it says chapter 15. And it's in Parshat Re'eh. And this is what it says. Okay, let me make sure I've got this correct. It's chapter 12, forgive me. Chapter 12, verse 17. One moment. My fingers are thick and the pages are thin. Okay. It's one of the first laws that Moses starts to specify in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay. All right, here we are. It's quite clear. You may not partake in your settlements of the tithes of your new grain or wine or oil, or of the firstlings of your herds and flocks, or of any of the votive offerings that you vow, or of your free will offerings, or of your contributions. So you can see that this law is going to refer to any of these sacred donations that an individual might bring. Okay? So this, let's see, make sure I've got this place right. So here we go. Al-kach, and regarding this, right, it says, the verse I just read, Lo tuchal le'echol b'sha'arecha. You are not permitted to eat it within your homes, within your gates. In other words, this had to be eaten in a sacred place. And here we go, Zo achilat tum'ah. So being able to eat it back home is saying the ability to consume this in a state of impurity. whether the food is pure or impure, the food, or has come in touch with certain things. This has to do with how things get to be impure, etc., or how a person does. But regardless, this bisharecha is understood to mean eating this in a state of impurity. Kamoshe Amar, and as is stated, bepsulei hamukdashim, regarding something that was supposed to be sanctified, but for some reason was excluded from it. It was no longer able to be dedicated. And this is chapter 15, verse 22. And I will also read that. And it's talking about something that was dedicated as a sacrifice, and that, for example, developed some blemish that rendered it impossible to be put on the altar. So let me find this, verse 22. Okay, let's see. All right. So I'll start with here we go. I'll start with verse 19, because it refers again. You shall consecrate to the Lord your God all male firstlings, that's a bechor, right, that are born in your herd and in your flock. You must not work your firstling ox or shear your firstling sheep. You and your household shall eat it annually before the Lord your God in the place that the Lord will choose. Obviously referring to taking it up to the temple and consuming it there. Now it goes on. This is the verse, 21. But if it has a defect, lameness or blindness, any serious defect, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. And here's verse 22. Eat it in your settlements, the unclean among you, look at that, no less than the clean, just like the gazelle and the deer. And there's another halacha involved, that is, you shall not partake of its blood, you shall pour it out on the ground like water. So basically, when we shecht an animal, that allows that to happen. So you can see how the tradition understands bisha'arecha, right? It says, bisha'arecha tochlenu hatamei v'hataor. So Rashi's quoting that verse 22. In your gates you shall eat of it, both the impure and the pure alike, etc. Aval zeh, but this, what we're talking about here, which is these tithes and things that were done properly, lo tuchal lechol derech achilat sha'arecha. But these you cannot eat, you cannot consume in the manner of eating in your gates, ha'amur b'makom acher, that was stated in this other place. That is back in chapter 16. Okay. So that's quite a mouthful on that particular little piece, right? V'lo natati lamet, I did not give of it to the dead, la'asot lo aron v'tachrichin, meaning, in other words, I sold this material, these tithes, etc., to purchase and to construct a casket and tachrichin, those are the shrouds. I did not use it for that purpose. And of course, you could say, well, why is this mentioned? And it's possible that, of course, taking care of the deceased is a terribly important mitzvah, kibud hamet, and maybe you might think that, in this particular case it was worth doing, etc., or it might be permissible, and it isn't. Okay. So it says, Shamati b'kol Hashem Elokai. I hearkened to the Lord, to the voice of the Lord my God. So this is from Tractate Masar Sheni, chapter 5. Havi otiv levet habechira. I brought it to, this is listening to your voice, I brought it to, literally it means the chosen house, of course referring to the temple. So transporting it to the temple is, of course, we know this is an issue, right? It's not a simple thing to do. Asiti kachol asher tzivitani. I have done everything that you have commanded me. Right? It sounds like a duplication, right? This is beautiful, this particular interpretation. Samachti, I rejoiced, vesimachti bo, and I believe what this is saying is I caused others to rejoice in it. So that idea of, again, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve the Lord with joy. And you think about what's going on right now in Afghanistan and Haiti and other parts of the world, and this can be a challenge. It can be a challenge. And yet, I don't want to go into a whole lengthy explanation of how we can understand it. Nevertheless, I guess I would only say that part of it involves a realization, first of all, to be totally compassionate about this, whatever we are in a position to help out in. But the other piece, of course, is to recognize just how brief life is, and in a sense also, how vulnerable we really all are. I love this next verse. I really do. Hashkifa mima'on kodshecha. Look down from your holy habitation. And just to be absolutely clear, what we mean by that, min hashamayim, and from heaven. Uvarech et amcha, and bless your people, et Yisrael, Israel, ve'et ha'adama, and the land, asher natata lanu, which you gave to us. Ka'asher nishbata lavotenu, just as you swore to our ancestors, to our patriarchs, Eretz Savat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. So, here we go. Hashkifa mima'on kodshecha. Look down from your holy habitation. So, Sifrei. Asinu ma shegazarta aleinu. We have performed what you have commanded us to do. So, Aseh ata ma she'alecha lasot. So since we've done what you've asked us to do, please do what you have committed yourself to do. This is a covenant. This is a declaration of a covenant. But it isn't just, a formality or a hypothetical thing. The performance of actually doing things, bringing these bikurim, performing mitzvot, that puts a certain gravitas and reality, a level of reality and strength to the creation of this relationship. So, she'amarta, which you said, and this is back in Vayikra Kaf Zayin, Leviticus 20, I believe that's a Zion, 27, Im bechukotai telechu. If you walk in my chukim, in my statutes, v'natati gishmechem be'itam, I will give the rains in their due season. Asher natata lanu, this is again back to the verse, which you gave to us, kasher nishbata la'avotenu, as you swore to our ancestors, latet lanu, to give to us. In other words, of course, when you go back to Genesis and read the lives of the patriarchs, and you realize how God makes these promises to them, that eventually their descendants will come and occupy the land of Canaan. The Kayamta, and you fulfilled it. You fulfilled this promise. Eretz Savat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. So I wanted to give you a chance. Okay, Golda, did you want to ask your question that you sent me in the chat?
Well, it's not really a question. It's
Okay.
just observation.
Okay. Do you want to share your observation?
That when nowadays, at least, I don't know if it's from this time period or whatever, but when you have my father died on second day of Pesach.
Yes.
So we had to finish Pesach before we could sit Shiva.
Correct.
I know. And so we're supposed to enjoy the holiday.
Right.
And get ready for Shiva.
Yes.
It was like, it was weird. I think if Lauren was here, she'd tell the same thing because she had a similar situation.
Right. It is really a great meditation to think about this, right?
Right. But this one said, if you're in mourning, you can't do this.
Correct. You're right. That's
right. So it's just like, yeah.
So it's like the reverse of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to observe the festival. It isn't going to come at another time. Although you do have Pesach Sheni, which applied to people who were already in mourning. And it could be that, yeah, I, there might be some different issues going on there, but the whole idea of being so mindful as to being able to separate out something that, of course, is an existential experience. Losing someone is
Right.
huge, huge, and yet saying, and that you have to suspend it until the end of the holiday. And by the way, of course, if the funeral takes place before the holiday cancels out Shiva,
I
and
know.
it may count towards Shloshim as well.
It
So
would have been easier, Shloshim as well.
yes,
Wow.
towards
It would
it
have been
does okay.
easier.
Sorry, Golda. It doesn't cancel Shloshim. It
It,
just counts towards Shloshim.
oh, okay.
So as
So
a
it
Shiva,
would have been easier
yes,
to have not done Shiva
right. I
than
know,
to actually go through Shiva after the Chag,
I know, I know.
especially a long Chag like that.
Right.
It's like 5 days before we had to bury dad
Yes.
during Chol Hamoed,
Right.
and then wait like 4 or 5 more days before, or 3 or 4 more days until we could actually sit Shiva. It was like
Hmm.
uh it was almost not necessary.
Yeah. So again, these are things to think about deeply because these are very sort of unusual kinds of laws. And I always tend to suspect, as you can imagine, at this point in my life, that there are deeper meanings to these kinds of things, and that I do trust to a very, very great extent the wisdom of the tradition in circumstances such as this, where life is still pretty much the same as it was, experiencing a loss like
So
etc.
my question is, where does that come from?
Okay, I think it's all okay. When you say come from, are you talking about the fact
The
that
idea of postponing your Shiva and your mourning for the Chag, and where does that actually
good
come
question.
from?
So I cannot answer that question
Oh, good.
specifically. Yeah, no, you have me
No,
stumped.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just would say that in looking at the laws that we are aware of from the Torah right here, that
Hmm.
the rabbis were able to derive. I have a feeling these are very ancient halachot, and that the rabbis were able to derive these particular issues, um, from the laws that we see. And the fact, I mean, essentially, it all boils down to the fact that you cannot mix mourning with the celebration of sacred time. So, I
Right.
think that's what it has to do with. But if I had
Yeah. And well, when the temple was there, or when you were still sacrificing, yes, I can see that
right,
that
well,
would make a problem. Yeah.
okay, so and of course understand very much how when the temple was destroyed, that could have spelt the end of the Jewish people as a
Right.
as a spiritual entity, right? And
Right.
the rabbis, I think, very, very wisely wanted to continue a lot of the spiritual practices, even though sacrificing and the temple service itself were no longer possible to observe. And that's why they did all these different things to make sure that the memory of this and the validity of it and its deep, they understood its deep implications, etc., for us even now would be continued and preserved, and always in the hopes that perhaps someday, not perhaps, that someday Hashem would restore the temple and restore the sacrificial service, and people would understand why. And I don't think from their point of view they were necessarily dealing with cruelty to animals and things like that. But I don't believe it was supposed to be cruel, but of course it definitely challenges our present day sensibilities. So, at any rate,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah, no, thank you. So I'm going to do a little bit more. So I am going to go to Shlishi. Hayom Hazeh. This is all beautiful to my mind, just incredibly beautiful stuff. Hayom Hazeh. This day, Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, mitzavcha la'asot et hachukim ha'ela. The Lord your God commands you to perform these statutes, ve'et hamishpatim, and the ordinances. So chukim, we know, refers to laws that don't necessarily have a rational basis. They are simply edicts that Hashem commands us to do, such as kashrut and quite possibly Shabbos and the festivals, things that we would do and perform simply out of love and a desire to fulfill the will of God, as we understand it, or as the Torah understands it. Mishpatim are laws that are, involve justice and trade and things like that. The civil and criminal law here. Vishamarta, you shall guard it, literally. Va'asita otam, and you shall perform them. B'chol levavcha, with your whole heart, v'chol nafshecha, and with all your soul. Okay. So let me go back and see what Rashi has to say about this, and we'll end with this. Okay. That we did there. Let's see. Okay, here it is. Sorry. Nope. Yep. Okay. Forgive me. Hayom hazeh Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha. On this day, the Lord your God commands you, and this Hayom hazeh is what's the interesting part of this phrase, and the understanding is bechol yom. That is to say, every day, yihiyu be'inecha chadashim. They should feel in your eyes as if they were just given. These laws were just given. It's like news, right? That you've just received. Ki'ilu bo bayom nitztavita alehem. As if on this very day you were commanded regarding them. So, v'shamarta, you shall guard, v'asito otam, and you shall perform them. And this is also a lovely interpretation. Bat kol mevarachto. So it's like a divine heavenly voice blesses him, pronounces this blessing. Hevetu bikurim hayom. Okay, you have brought first fruits today. Tishaneh l'shana baha. You will do it once again next year. That's the blessing. That you'll be able to repeat this particular act next year again. So I'm going to stop the share here. And also we'll stop the recording, and just again always to thank people who have stayed with us through this entire recording, and just to let you know how much I appreciate being able to share with you.